We're planning to live here now. Can you leave? You've only been here for the inheritance, haven't you? How could you be so heartless? Please, just leave. My sister, Susan, and her husband insisted that I leave the house. Despite the years I had spent caring for our father, he stood beside her, offering no support. Fine, but I'll be taking everything I bought, I said. Do whatever you want, came her cold reply. After that conversation, I carefully collected the things I had purchased over the years. A few days later, they asked, "Wait, where are all the furniture and appliances gone? My name is Kate, and I'm just an ordinary office worker in my 30s. My relationship with my family has always been strained, especially with my sister, Susan. Susan, 2 years older than me, was always the center of attention. She was not only beautiful, but also an exceptional pianist, winning numerous contests. To our music-loving parents, she was their prodigy. Susan is amazing. Even her piano teacher says she'll become a famous pianist one day. They'd often gush. It was clear to me that Susan was their shining star. As for me, I was always just average, with no remarkable talents in the arts, and not particularly gifted in any other way. I began to feel like a shadow in our home. Our parents would always say, "As long as we have Susan, our family is complete." They'd even joke, "We can't expect much from Kate. Just make sure she doesn't cause any trouble." Confused, I asked my elementary school teacher what they meant by "don't cause trouble." She kindly advised, "Just study hard and be a good child. That's all your parents want from you." So, I threw myself into my studies, aiming to top my class and be as diligent as possible. But no matter how hard I tried, my efforts seemed to go unnoticed. Their focus remained solely on Susan. Even when I did well on exams, there were no celebrations, no praise. But Susan? She was constantly in the spotlight, scouted for modeling jobs and talked about as if she was destined for greatness. "She's got that modern beauty, you know. As a pianist, she'll be adored by so many," they'd say. My parents truly believed in Susan's potential, and they poured time, money, and affection into everything she wanted. Whatever she desired, new clothes, toys, whatever it was bought for her without question. As for me, it was different. I was often told, "We can't afford it right now," while wearing Susan's old clothes. At school, when the latest trends were discussed, I could only wait for the leftovers from my sister. By the time they got to me, they were always out of date, and I felt invisible in conversations. Fortunately, I wasn't bullied for being in Susan's shadow. In some ways, I consider myself lucky for that. By middle school, my sister's presence in our home was even more overwhelming. She had grown even more beautiful. Her modeling work was taking off, and she always seemed to be on the go. Her piano competition rankings had slipped a bit, but she still held a significant presence in the music world. But around this time, something shifted in her. The praise she received for her beauty and talent seemed to go to her head, and she began to develop an air of arrogance. She acted as though the world revolved around her, as if she had everything in her grasp. Her attitude toward me became colder once she entered middle school. One day, she turned to me and said, "I hate that we go to the same school. I don't want anyone to know you're my sister." It was painful to hear. She began avoiding me, as if I was an embarrassment, making it clear she wanted as little to do with me as possible. What stung even more was that it felt like our parents sided with her. So, since Susan said so, don't get too close to her at school, they told me one day. Yes, be careful not to do anything that would stress Susan out. Hearing those words from our parents cut deep. I was told to stay away from her, as if I were the problem. We were in different classes, so our interactions were limited. But being told this felt like a rejection. And over time, I started to feel like I didn't have a place in our home. Studying became my refuge. It was the one thing I could control, and it showed in my grades. I consistently ranked at the top of my class. Meanwhile, Susan, though exceptionally talented at piano, wasn't particularly interested in academics. Still, she worked hard enough to get into a prestigious private high school. The atmosphere at home was one of celebration. My parents beamed with pride as they talked about Susan's achievement, smiling in a way I had never seen before. It was a joyous moment for them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was invisible. I, too, had worked hard. I managed to get accepted into the top public high school in our area. I thought I had put in a lot of effort. But at home, the conversation was dominated by my sister's plans for private university. I had hoped for some acknowledgement of my own accomplishments, but no matter how much I tried, my parents' attention was always on Susan. It was a bit disappointing. I had worked just as hard, yet my achievements seemed to fade into the background. Still, I tried to put those feelings aside. I decided to make the most of my high school years and focus on my studies. At least I could take pride in that. Yet, Susan never missed an opportunity to tease me. "You're really not girly at all. Don't you care about makeup? It's hard to believe we're sisters." She'd laugh, almost as if to highlight our differences. She had even won a beauty contest in college, and after that, her boasting became constant at home. It felt like she looked down on me with every passing day, and our parents, riding high on Susan's success, started to belittle me too. "Why don't you try being a bit more girlish?" they would say. "Being good at studying doesn't mean much. Glamour matters too." Like Susan, honestly, I don't want to tell my friends that the sister of a beauty contest winner is so plain. When Susan leaves, please make sure your timing is different. Hearing this over and over again, my heart began to harden. The sting lessened with time, but so did the pain. It became a numbness I couldn't shake, a constant reminder that no matter what I did, I would always be in Susan's shadow. As time went on, I started to feel that my sister, once seen as an impressive figure, was slowly losing her spark. She had been known as a piano prodigy, but her piano skills seemed to plateau, and she began to distance herself from it altogether. Her modeling offers dwindled, eventually disappearing entirely. The expectations our parents had placed on her to be the beautiful, talented pianist were slowly fading, and it felt like she was veering off course. Seeing her like this made me feel a sense of clarity. While my sister seemed to be struggling with her direction, I knew I had to stay focused on my own dreams. I couldn't afford to get lost in the same confusion. I believed that if I kept pushing toward my goals, I could build a fulfilling future. The atmosphere at home was far from ideal, but I knew I needed to keep moving forward, step by step, to avoid being consumed by the negativity surrounding me. When the time came for the college entrance exams, I set my sights on prestigious national and public universities, as I always had. However, I hit an unexpected obstacle. One day, with some trepidation but also a sense of excitement, I showed my parents a university brochure and told them, "I'm aiming for this university." Their response was shocking. "Wait, university? Why would you want to go to such an expensive place?" my father asked. My mother chimed in, "We're putting the money towards Susan. She's taking an extra year in college, so we won't be able to fund your education. Kate, if you really want to go, you'll have to get a scholarship." I was taken aback, speechless. I hadn't expected that at all. It felt as though they had completely overlooked my own dreams and achievements, their focus entirely on Susan. But I wasn't someone who easily gave up. Despite the disappointment, I decided to go to a university where I could secure a scholarship. The university wasn't as prestigious as the one I had originally hoped for, but I was proud of myself for carving out my own path, starting my college life on my own terms. Once I entered college, I started working part-time. Sure, part of it was to gain social experience, but honestly, a bigger part of me wanted to leave my parents' house as soon as possible. The atmosphere there had become suffocating. My sister and parents were always in high spirits, as though they lived in a world of their own, while I felt like an outsider, unable to fit in. Then, one day, my father surprised me with an unexpected comment. "Are you planning to live here forever without contributing anything?" he asked, almost accusingly. I was stunned and responded, "What are you talking about?" But he made it clear, he expected me to start paying rent. I was taken aback and immediately said, "If that's the case, I'll find my own place and live alone." But he didn't let me go that easily. "Considering all the help we've given you so far, it's only natural to contribute," he said, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Of course, living alone is fine, but you should be helping with the household expenses." His words stung. It felt like no matter how much I tried to assert my independence, I was still being held to the standards of the household that had never truly acknowledged my needs. It was becoming clear that my journey to independence would be a far harder fight than I had imagined. "Are you serious? With the salary from my student part-time job? That's just impossible." I couldn't contain the frustration rising within me. Meanwhile, my older sister lived luxuriously, receiving a generous allowance from our parents, without ever needing to lift a finger. Seeing that only made the unfairness more glaring. "When I graduate, I'll take control of my own life," I vowed in my heart, determined to carve my own path. But as graduation drew closer, my parents' stance remained unyielding. It seemed that living alone, something I had dreamed of for years, was an impossibility. In stark contrast, my sister never once seemed to worry about money. She continued to live comfortably, all expenses covered by our parents, without so much as a part-time job to her name. Then, after I graduated from college, I was hit with a crushing blow. "You haven't even repaid your college tuition, have you?" my parents said, their faces stern. "Don't even think about living on your own until you've paid it back." And yet, to my shock and utter disbelief, my sister was living alone with our parents covering her rent entirely. I couldn't hold back the wave of frustration and disappointment. How could they justify this disparity? As if that wasn't enough, I later discovered that my sister had been working in the night industry, making substantial money, and receiving luxury brand bags and accessories from her patrons. Meanwhile, our parents continued to pay for her rent, and she was financially supported by other men. I couldn't believe what I was learning. The obvious favoritism stung even more knowing that I had been struggling for independence on my own terms. Despite my frustration, I refused to give up on my dreams. I believed I had the strength to move forward, to look ahead with hope, even if it felt like the world around me was against me. When I was 28, my mother passed away after a long battle with a chronic illness. I had watched her health deteriorate for years, and though I had sensed the end was near, it didn't make the moment any easier. My father and sister were devastated, drowning in grief, but I, strangely, felt no tears. All I could think about was the years of cold treatment, the emotional distance that had always existed between me and my mother. Instead of sorrow, I felt a numbness, a relief, perhaps, that the struggle was over. My father and sister criticized me for being cold-hearted, but their words didn't faze me. I had grown used to their judgment, to the emotional walls they'd built around me. Life continued, and then, not long after, my father's health began to deteriorate as well. His legs and back weakened, making it impossible for him to manage his daily activities. He needed care. I contacted my sister to let her know, hoping she would step in, but her response stung. "It's hard to take care of Dad right now with my newlywed life," she said dismissively. She had just married a man she met through her night job, and she didn't want anything to disrupt her happy time. She made it clear that I should shoulder the responsibility. Although I was hurt, I wasn't surprised. This had always been my role in the family, the one left to pick up the pieces. I didn't have any big expectations from my sister. I took on the responsibility of caring for our father. Despite working a full-time job, I hired help during the day, but I took care of him during the evenings and weekends to save money. Still, my father never thanked me. Instead, he found fault in everything I did. Lower the water temperature. Come when I call. You're so clumsy. He would snap at me. Despite my efforts, nothing was ever good enough. A year passed, and just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, an unexpected development occurred. One afternoon, my sister and her husband appeared at our family home unannounced. "We've decided to move in here," she said casually. "Can you leave?" "What do you mean?" I replied, staring at her, stunned. Her cold eyes met mine, her expression devoid of empathy. "Why bring this up all of a sudden?" I asked, feeling a wave of confusion and anger rising in me. The confrontation was inevitable. My sister's sudden arrival and demand caught me off guard, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything I had endured, the unfairness, the isolation, the sacrifices I had made, crushing down on me. I was stunned when my sister accused me of something I couldn't have imagined. "You're just trying to get our mother's inheritance, aren't you?" she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. Her husband added, with disdain, "I can't believe we have someone like this in the family." I was taken aback. "I never thought about the inheritance. Why would you even think that?" I responded, confusion overtaking me. But my sister wasn't done. She shouted even louder, "Stop pretending. We're moving in, so leave." Then, to my complete shock, my father, who had been the one I'd cared for all this time, sided with my sister. "Actually, I've been thinking the same thing as Susan. I thought you might be draining our money by staying here." I was speechless. After everything, after I had taken care of him for so long, he chose her side. It was hard to believe. But strangely, a wave of relief washed over me. Perhaps this was finally the moment I could break free. I took a deep breath. "I get it, but I can take everything I bought, right?" I asked, hoping to clarify what I was entitled to. My sister responded without hesitation, "Take whatever you want. Don't worry about it, LOL." Her indifference stung, but I didn't let it affect me. It was clear that she was relieved to see me go, and so was I. Her words echoed in my mind, "It'd be great if you could leave quickly." She and her husband left with a casual laugh, making it clear that they were eager to see me gone. And so, I packed up everything I had purchased over the years. As I moved into my new place, I felt a sense of freedom. Finally, I was free from the chains of that house. When I finished the move, I sent my sister a quick message. Her response came almost immediately. That was quicker than expected. "Impressive," she said sarcastically. "Make sure you don't come back here." In my mind, I'd already made up my mind that I wasn't going back. I was done. A week later, my phone rang. It was my sister's name flashing on the screen. "Hello, why did you call?" I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Her tone was filled with urgency and confusion. "Why is the house so empty? There's no furniture, no appliances, nothing." I couldn't hide the smirk that crept onto my face. "Oh, that's because I took everything," I replied coolly. Her voice crackled with disbelief. "What are you talking about? Is this a joke? Why would you do that?" I could hear her confusion as she tried to piece it together. "But didn't you say I could take everything I bought?" "But didn't Dad buy those things with Mom's inheritance?" she said, clearly convinced of her own version of the truth. I laughed softly. though it was more of a bitter chuckle. That's not the case. There's no such thing as mom's inheritance. Everything in that house, furniture, appliances, everything was bought with money I earned myself. There was a pause on the line before she came back with a stunned question. Wait, all those were the latest appliances? How did you have so much money? I took a deep breath, holding back the pride that swelled in my chest. Well, the company I work for is quite big, I explained briefly. When I mentioned the company's name, I could hear the shock in her voice. She had heard of it, despite her lack of worldly knowledge. It felt good to see her stunned, to realize that all those years of hard work were paying off, and that, finally, I had something to be proud of. I couldn't help but smile as I imagined her, still struggling to understand the reality of it all. For once, I was in control. I became a section manager at 30, so I'm financially stable now. I bought all those appliances and the car with my own money. My sister seemed incredulous. Wait, even the car at home? Yes, that's why I took everything, I responded matter-of-factly. Her voice raised in frustration. What? I never knew that. How are we supposed to live without appliances and a car now? I couldn't help but feel a bit of sarcasm. That's not my problem. I was kicked out. Remember? She was silent for a moment before responding, her voice lower. But your husband is a business owner, right? It shouldn't be too difficult to buy new appliances and a car. I raised an eyebrow. Actually, my husband's company is in a bit of a tough situation, she admitted reluctantly. I understood now. Her sudden return to the family home and her decision to kick me out weren't just to reunite, it was about cutting costs and possibly trying to get some financial help from our father. And perhaps, she had her eye on our mother's so-called inheritance. Oh, is that so? Well, living simply without appliances or a car might not be that bad, I remarked lightly. She was desperate. Don't say that so easily. Return the appliances. Why? They're mine, I shot back firmly. Please, we won't be able to live without them, she pleaded, her voice trembling. At this point, I'd had enough. If you're that financially strained, why not sell your favorite branded bags and such? I teased, knowing the reality. As far as I'm concerned, there's no reason for me to have any further contact with you or Dad. So please, don't contact me again. I ended the call and blocked her number immediately. Thankfully, I hadn't given her my new address, and I knew she couldn't show up at my workplace without facing legal consequences. A while later, a relative reached out with news about my sister and her family. They had sold the family home and moved into a cramped apartment. The costs were higher than they'd expected, and the atmosphere there was tense. Her husband, apparently stressed, had left to de-stress, leaving her and our father to manage the household. She'd returned to her previous night job, but with age catching up to her, it was no longer as easy as before. Rumors had it that her colleagues constantly teased her, and eventually, she made a mistake that caused her to be unemployable. I can't say I felt sympathy for her. Managing our father's care while trying to balance her own life was clearly proving to be a challenge. I wasn't sure how to feel about it, but I reminded myself, this was no longer my problem. My life, on the other hand, was peaceful. My new apartment was comfortable, and I found joy in my work and in the company of my cat. With everything settling into place, I started thinking about the next steps in life, dating, marriage, and a future that I could shape on my own terms.